My Father Goes to Court by Carlos Bulosan. There was a 4-year-old boy who lived with his mother and brothers and sisters in a small town on the island of Luzon. His father's farm had been destroyed in 1918 by one of sudden Philippine floods. So several years afterwards they all lived in the town, though his father preferred living in the country. They had as a next-door neighbor a very rich man, whose sons and daughters seldom came out of the house. While the boys and girls played and sang in the sun, the children of the rich man stayed inside and kept the windows closed. The rich man's house was so tall that his children could look in the window of his house and watch the other children played, or slept, or ate. Now, this rich man's servants were always frying and cooking something good, and the aroma of the food was wafted down to the poor family from the windows of the big house. The poor family hung about and took all the wonderful smells of the food into their beings. Sometimes in the morning, their whole family stood outside the windows of the rich man's house and listened to the musical sizzling of thick strips of bacon or ham. One afternoon, when their neighbor's servants roasted 3 chickens, the chickens were young and tender, and the fat that dripped into the burning coals gave off an enchanting odor. They watched the servants turn the beautiful birds and inhaled the heavenly spirit that drifted out to them. Some days the rich man appeared at a window and glowered down at them. They were all healthy because they went out in the sun and bathed in the cool water of the river that flowed from the mountains into the sea, and even wrestling each other in the house before going outside to play. They were always in the best of spirits, and their laughter was contagious. Other neighbors who passed by their house often stopped in their yard and joined them in laughter. As time went on, the rich man's children became thin and anemic, while they grew even more robust and full of life. The rich man started to cough at night. Then he coughed day and night. His wife began coughing too. Then the children started to cough, one after the other. At night their coughing sounded like the barking of a herd of seals. They hung outside their windows and listened to the rich man's family. They wondered what happened. They knew that they were not sick from the lack of nourishment because they were still always frying something delicious to eat. One day the rich man appeared at a window and stood there a long time. He looked at the other kids who had grown healthy and happy. He banged down the window and ran through his house, shutting all the windows. From that day on, the windows of the rich man's house were always closed. His children did not come out anymore. The poor family could still hear the servants cooking in the kitchen, and no matter how tight the windows were shut, the aroma of the food is going to them in the wind and drifted gratuitously into their house. One morning a policeman went to the poor family's house with a sealed paper. The rich man had filed a complaint against them. The town clerk told the poor man that the rich man claimed that for years they had been stealing the spirit of his wealth and food. When the day came for them to appear in court, the poor man brushed his old army uniform and borrowed a pair of shoes from one of his sons. They were the first to arrive. The poor man sat on a chair in the center of the courtroom. His wife occupied a chair by the door, and the children sat on a long bench by the wall. The father kept jumping up from his chair and stabbing the air with his arms, as though he is defending himself before an imaginary jury. The rich man arrived. He had grown old and feeble. His face was scarred with deep lines. With him was his young lawyer. Spectators came in and almost filled the chairs. The judge entered the room and sat on a high chair. After the courtroom preliminaries, the judge looked at the poor man.
"Do you have a lawyer?"
he asked.
"I don't need any lawyer, Judge,"
he said.
"Proceed,"
said the judge. The rich man's lawyer jumped up and pointed his finger at the poor man.
"Do you or you do not agree that you have been stealing the spirit of the complainant's wealth and food?
"I do not."
Do you or do you not agree that while the complainant's servants cooked and fried fat legs of lamb or young chicken breast, you and your family hung outside his windows and inhaled the heavenly spirit of the food?
"I agree."
Do you or do you not agree that while the complainant and his children grew sickly and tubercular, you and your family became strong of limb and fair in complexion?
"I agree."
How do you account for that?"
The poor man got up and paced around, scratching his head thoughtfully. Then he said,
"I would like to see the children of complainant, Judge."
"Bring in the children of the complainant."
They came in shyly. The spectators covered their mouths with their hands. They were so amazed to see the children so thin and pale. The children walked silently to a bench and sat down without looking up. They stared at the floor and moved their hands uneasily. The poor man could not say anything at first. He just stood by his chair and looked at them. Finally, he said,
I should like to cross-examine the complainant.
Proceed.
Do you claim that we stole the spirit of your wealth and became a laughing family while yours became morose and sad?
Yes.
Do you claim that we stole the spirit of your food by hanging outside your windows when your servants cooked it?
Yes.
Then we are going to pay you right now.
The poor man walked over to where his children were sitting on the bench and took the straw hat off his son's lap and began filling it up with centavo pieces that he took out of his pockets. He went to his wife, who added a fistful of silver coins. His sons threw in their small change.
May I walk to the room across the hall and stay there for a few minutes, Judge?
As you wish.
Thank you.
He strode into the other room with the hat in his hands. It was almost full of coins. The doors of both rooms were wide open.
Are you ready?
Proceed.
The sweet tinkle of the coins carried beautifully in the courtroom. The spectators turned their faces toward the sound with wonder. The father came back and stood before the complainant.
Did you hear it?
Hear what?
The spirit of the money when I shook this hat.
Yes.
Then you are paid.
The rich man opened his mouth to speak and fell to the floor without a sound. The lawyer rushed to his aid. The judge pounded his gavel.
Case dismissed.